Elias Thorne stood before the viewport of the orbital station Zenith, watching the curve of the gas giant below swallow the starlight. He adjusted the collar of his dress uniform, which felt significantly more constricting than the flight suit he had worn for 15 years. The fabric was stiff, the metals on his chest heavy with a history he preferred to forget. He was a pilot, a man built for the claustrophobic comfort of a cockpit and the honest mathematics of trajectory and thrust. He was not built for this. He was 38 years old, decorated for valor in the Antares conflict, and currently grounded. The incident over the mining colony of Carroll had been technically classified as a tactical success, but the political fallout had been radioactive. High Command had given him a choice between a court-martial for insubordination or a transfer to the diplomatic corps as a junior envoy. They called it a lateral move. Elias knew it was a leash. The station around him was a masterpiece of multi-species engineering, a shining ring of durasteel and glass spinning in the void. It was the neutral ground for the upcoming Galactic Peace Summit, a fragile attempt to stitch together a trade pact between the United Systems and the Terran Coalition. Elias sighed, his breath fogging the glass for a second before the environmental scrubbers wiped it away. He was supposed to be a symbol of human military restraint, a prop. Captain Thorne. The voice was like spun silk wrapped around a razor blade. Elias turned. Standing in the archway of the observation deck was the most terrifyingly beautiful creature he had ever seen. She was tall, perhaps 6 feet without the heels, human in general geometry but distinctly alien in the details that mattered. Her skin was the color of pale moonlight, dusting into a warm russet around her neck and wrists. Her eyes were large, tilted, and glowing with a bioluminescent amber light that narrowed into vertical slits as she assessed him. But it was the ears and the tail that marked her lineage. Large, tufted fox ears twitched atop a cascade of silver-white hair, swiveling to catch the hum of the station's ventilation. Behind her, a thick, luxurious tail swept the floor with the rhythmic, hypnotic motion of a predator waiting to pounce. She was Veyron, and if the dossier Elias had read on the shuttle was correct, she was Lyra Vane. "You are staring," she said, walking toward him. Her gait was fluid, a rolling grace that made his own movements feel jerky and mechanical. "I am admiring the local wildlife," Elias replied, crossing his arms. "You must be the cultural liaison. I am the cultural attaché to the Veyron delegation and, specifically, your behavioral safeguard," Lyra corrected. She stopped 2 feet from him, invading his personal space with a scent that smelled like ozone and crushed cinnamon. The Alliance is concerned that a man who drops fusion charges on unauthorized mining platforms might have trouble navigating a cocktail party without causing an interstellar incident. Elias held her gaze. The charges were authorized. The recall order was jammed. Lyra smiled, exposing teeth that were just sharp enough to trigger a primate fight-or-flight response in his brain. "That is the official story. We both know you simply did not like the mining guild's tone." She circled him, her tail brushing against his leg as she passed. It was a heavy, muscular limb, not just decoration. Elias stood rigid, fighting the urge to step away. "So," he said, turning to face her, "you are here to keep me on a leash." "I am here to ensure you do not bite anyone," she said. "Though I have heard humans have dull teeth, it seems hardly worth the effort." Lyra Vane was Veyron royalty, or at least the adjacent aristocracy. The briefing stated she was brilliant, reckless, and prone to ignoring the stiff protocols of the High Council. Looking at her now, Elias saw the intelligence in those amber eyes, but also a flicker of boredom. She looked at the station the way a tiger looked at a circus cage. "We have a schedule, Captain," she said, checking a holographic projection on her wrist. The opening ceremonies for the Peace Summit have been finalized. The delegates from the 3 star systems will arrive in 48 hours. Until then, I am to walk you through the customs, taboos, and acceptable conversational topics of the attending species. Elias groaned. Can we skip to the part where I stand in the back and drink synthetic scotch? Lyra laughed, a short, barking sound that was surprisingly charming. If you behave, I might let you hold my drink. Come, we are late for the sector tour. The next 2 days were a blur of neon markets, gravity-free garden districts, and endless lectures. Lyra was a merciless teacher. She drilled him on the proper bowing angle for a Krell matriarch and the exact number of seconds one could make eye contact with a Signian merchant before it became a declaration of war. Despite her arrogance, Elias found himself liking her. She was sharp-tongued and cynical, treating the pompous diplomats they passed with the same weary disdain he felt. They developed a rhythm. She would insult his fashion sense, he would critique the station's structural integrity, and they would both ignore the whispers that followed them. The rumors were already starting. The disgraced human war hero and the wild Varen heiress. It was a pairing designed for tabloids. On the morning of the 3rd day, the station's public address system chimed with a trilling, melodic tone. Attention all citizens and guests, the artificial voice announced. The Galactic Council is pleased to announce the final schedule for the Peace Summit. Please note that due to orbital alignment, the summit will coincide with the decennial Varen high season. We ask all non-Varen personnel to exercise courtesy and maintain designated boundaries. Elias was sitting across from Lyra in a cafe overlooking the shipyard. When the announcement finished, Lyra froze. Her cup paused halfway to her lips. The amber light in her eyes flared brighter, then dimmed rapidly. High season? Elias asked. Is that a holiday? Lyra set the cup down. The ceramic clicked loudly against the table, her ears flattened against her skull. It is a biological cycle, she said, her voice tight. It occurs once every 10 standard years. It affects the neurochemistry of my people. It is a time of heightened emotion, instinct. Mating season, Elias translated bluntly. Lyra glared at him. We are not animals, Captain. It is a period of intense bonding drive and hormonal fluctuation. It is perfectly manageable with meditation and suppressants. Her hand was shaking, just slightly. Elias noticed her claws were extended, digging small grooves into the tabletop. You do not look perfectly manageable, he noted. I am fine, she snapped. Her tail lashed behind her chair, knocking over a spare napkin holder. It is simply inconvenient timing. The summit requires absolute focus. I cannot afford to be distracted by biological noise. Elias leaned forward. If this is going to be a problem, you should take leave. I can handle the diplomats. Lyra let out a hiss of air. You cannot handle a dinner menu without supervision. Elias, I am not leaving. I am a diplomat of the Vera. I do not succumb to base urges just because a calendar turns. She stood up abruptly. I need to meditate. Stay here. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch anything. And for the love of the void, try not to look so aggressively human. She stormed out of the cafe, the crowd parting around her like water around a shark. Elias watched her go. She walked faster than usual, her shoulders hunched as if she were fighting a strong wind. Of course, Elias did not stay in the cafe. After 20 minutes of boredom, he wandered out into the promenade. He needed to stretch his legs, and the station's layout was fascinating. He found himself drifting toward the Arboretum sector, a massive domed enclosure filled with flora from a dozen worlds. The air here was thick and humid, smelling of damp earth and alien spices. Elias walked along a path of crushed white stone, admiring a tree with leaves that shimmered like blue glass. He turned a corner and found himself in a small, secluded courtyard. In the center of the courtyard stood a statue of a Varen elder, carved from obsidian. Around the base of the statue, dozens of intricate ribbons were tied to a low railing. The ribbons were a deep, vibrant crimson, embroidered with gold thread. They fluttered in the artificial breeze, hypnotic and beautiful. Elias stepped closer. One ribbon had fallen loose and was lying on the dirty path. Instinctively, he bent down and picked it up. The fabric was impossibly soft, warm to the touch. He dusted it off, intending to tie it back onto the railing. He did not see the drone hovering silently above the tree line. As he tied the knot, securing the red ribbon next to the others, a hush fell over the courtyard. Elias turned around. 3 Varen pedestrians were staring at him. Their mouths were open. Their ears were standing straight up. One of them, a young male, covered his face with his hands and hurried away. The others whispered frantically to each other, casting scandalous glances at Elias. "What?" Elias asked. It was on the ground. He didn't think much of it until he returned to his quarters 2 hours later. His datapad was blinking with urgent notifications. He opened the feed and saw his own face staring back at him. The image was a high-resolution capture of him tying the red ribbon. The caption, in bold galactic basic, read, "Human envoy declares intent. War hero seeks harem in sacred courtyard." Elias stared at the screen. He scrolled down. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur. Is he proposing to the statue? That is a challenge ribbon. He just challenged every male in the sector for dominance. No, the red ribbon is for fertility. He is advertising his breeding availability. Elias dropped the datapad on the bed. The door to his quarters whooshed open. Lyra stood there. She looked disheveled. Her uniform was wrinkled, and her eyes were wide. The pupils dilated until the amber was just a thin ring. "You," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and something else. "You tied the knot of the red moon. I was picking it up." Elias defended himself. "I didn't know it was a marriage proposal." "It is not a marriage proposal," Lyra said, stepping into the room and letting the door seal behind her. "It is a solicitation. In the old codes, tying that ribbon means you are a prime physical specimen seeking a mate of high standing to start a lineage." Elias rubbed his temples. "You have got to be kidding me." "The station is laughing," Lyra said. She paced the room, her movements jerky. "But that is not the worst part. The images are viral. You have made yourself a focal point of the high season. Every unbonded Varen on this station now perceives you as relevant." "Relevant?" "Desirable," Lyra hissed. She stopped pacing and looked at him. She took a deep breath through her nose, and Elias saw her nostrils flare. A challenge. She took a step toward him. Elias backed up until his legs hit the edge of the bed. "Lyra, you are doing the I thing again." "I am in control," she said, but her voice was an octave lower than usual. Her tail was thrashing behind her. "You smell of the arboretum and anxiety. It is a potent combination." She shook her head violently, her ears flapping. "Listen to me. The summit begins tonight with the Grand Gala. This mistake makes you a target. There are factions who want to disrupt the peace talks. They will use this. They will try to provoke you or seduce you to cause a scandal that invalidates the human delegation." "I can handle myself," Elias said. "Not during high season, you cannot," Lyra said. "The pheromones in the air will be thick enough to taste. My people will be on edge. The inhibitors are only 50% effective when the biological resonance hits critical mass. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket. Her grip was iron hard. Do not wander off. Do not accept drinks from strangers. And if a Varen bares their throat to you, do not touch them. Understood, Elias said, his heart hammering against his ribs. She was close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her iris. Good, she whispered. She lingered for a second too long, her gaze dropping to his mouth before she shoved him away. Get dressed. We have a gala to survive. The grand gala was held in the Zenith Ballroom, a cavernous space with a transparent floor that looked down upon the swirling clouds of the gas giant. Thousands of dignitaries mingled under floating chandeliers. The air was filled with the drone of a dozen languages and the clinking of crystal. But Elias felt the tension immediately. It wasn't just the politics. The air felt charged, heavy and electric. He saw Varen delegates standing in tight clusters, their eyes darting, their movements sharp. The other species looked nervous, sensing the predatory energy in the room. Elias stuck close to Lyra. She was wearing a gown of shimmering silver fabric that looked like liquid mercury. It left her back open, allowing her tail freedom of movement. She held her head high, her expression imperious. But Elias noticed the way her hand trembled when she reached for a canapé. Stay close, she murmured. The density of pheromones here is overwhelming. You doing okay? Elias asked. I am struggling to filter the noise, she admitted. It is like being in a room where everyone is screaming, but the screams are sense, desire, aggression, fear. They moved through the crowd. Elias felt eyes on him. The viral video had done its work. Varen women watched him with calculating hunger. Varen men watched him with cold assessment. A tall, broad-shouldered Varen male blocked their path. He was dressed in the dark greens of the Varen military aristocracy. A scar ran down his muzzle. So, the human who ties the knot. The Varen rumbled. His voice was a deep bass that vibrated in Elias's chest. Count Varric, Lyra said, stepping slightly in front of Elias. Her ears went flat. Let us pass. He is smaller than he looks in the hollows. Varric sneered, ignoring Lyra. He looked at Elias with pure contempt. Tell me, pilot, do you think tying a ribbon makes you worthy of our bloodlines? You are a dull, flat-toothed primate. You would break in a real mating cycle. Elias kept his face neutral. I was just picking up litter. Count, I leave the breeding rituals to the experts. Varric laughed, a harsh sound. He stepped closer, invading Elias's space. You mock us? You think our instincts are a joke? I think you are blocking the bar, Elias said. Varric snarled. His hand dropped to his side, where a ceremonial dagger hung. It was a subtle movement, but in the charged atmosphere of the ballroom, it was a thunderclap. Around them, the conversation died. The air grew thick. Elias saw other Varens turning, their eyes glowing. The pack instinct was kicking in. Violence was contagious. Lyra let out a low growl. It wasn't a human sound. It was a warning from deep within her throat. Back down. Varric, she warned. He is not under your protection. Vane, Varric spat. He is a free agent. He solicited the court. If he cannot defend his claim, he is prey. Varric shoved Elias. It was a hard, aggressive push, meant to knock him to the ground. Elias stumbled back, his boots sliding on the glass floor. The aggression acted like a spark in a room full of gasoline. The scent of conflict hit Lyra like a physical blow. Her pupils swallowed her eyes completely. The civil diplomatic veneer she had been holding onto with white-knuckled grip shattered. The biology of the Vera was ancient and absolute. When a threat appeared during high season, the response was not negotiation. It was possession. Varric raised his hand to strike Elias again. He never finished the motion. Lyra moved. She was a blur of silver and white, faster than human eyes could track. She didn't block Varric. She didn't strike him. She launched herself at Elias. It happened in a single, unforgettable beat. Lyra hit Elias mid-chest, tackling him with the force of a linebacker. They went down together, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Elias gasped as the air left his lungs. He looked up, dazed. Lyra was straddling him. Her hands were pinned to his shoulders, her claws extended and digging into the fabric of his uniform. Her hair fell around them like a curtain, shielding him from the room. Her chest was heaving, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She bared her teeth at the room, at Varric, at the entire galaxy. It was a snarl of pure, unadulterated ownership. "You belong to me," she screamed. The words echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Silence, absolute, terrified silence. Then, the flashes started. Hundreds of cameras. The media drones descended like vultures. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Laughter from the Terrans, outrage from the Veyron elders, shock from the diplomats. Elias lay there, stunned, staring up at the woman who was currently pinning him to the floor. Her eyes were wild, feral, but focused entirely on him. He could feel the heat radiating off her. He was humiliated. He was terrified. And God help him, he was electrified. "Get off me, Lyra," he whispered, though he didn't try to push her away. "Mine," she breathed, her voice a broken growl. She looked confused, as if waking up from a dream, but her grip didn't loosen. Varric was backing away, looking both disgusted and wary. To challenge a claimed mate was a death sentence in the old codes, and Lyra looked ready to kill. Suddenly, a sharp crack whizzed through the air, followed by the shatter of glass. A scorch mark appeared on the floor, exactly where Elias's head had been 3 seconds ago. Elias froze. He looked at the smoking crater in the glass, then up at Lyra. The amber glow in her eyes was fading, replaced by sudden, sharp clarity. She hadn't just tackled him. She had pushed him out of the trajectory of a high-velocity slug. The crowd screamed as security alarms began to blare. A second shot rang out, shattering a chandelier above them. "Stay down!" Lyra barked, her voice suddenly human again, stripped of the feral growl. She covered his body with hers, her tail wrapping around his legs, shielding him as the gala dissolved into panic. Elias looked at the chaos erupting around them, the running diplomats, the flashing lights, the guards storming in. He looked at the foxwoman on top of him, who had just claimed him as property in front of 3 star systems. "You missed a spot," he mumbled, adrenaline flooding his veins. "Shut up, husband," she hissed, grabbing his collar and dragging him toward the cover of a banquet table. "We are leaving." Elias scrambled after her, realizing with a sinking feeling in his gut that the ribbon incident was the least of his problems. Someone wanted him dead, and the only thing standing between him and a plasma round was a diplomat who might try to eat him later. As they sprinted toward the service exit, Elias checked his wrist comp. The peace summit hadn't even officially started yet. It was going to be a long week. The inquiry room of the Galactic Alliance Council was a perfect sphere of white noise and judgment. 12 counselors sat on elevated platforms, their faces obscured by privacy fields that rendered them as shimmering, indistinct silhouettes. Elias Thorne stood in the center of the pit, his dress uniform scorched at the shoulder from the plasma discharge the night before. Beside him stood Lyra Vane, looking uncharacteristically still. The projection of the High Counselor, a saline-based life form from the Hydra system, rippled with indigo light. "Captain Thorne," the synthesized voice boomed, vibrating the metal floor beneath Elias's boots. "You are a junior envoy. Your mandate was to observe and abstain. Instead, within 72 hours of your arrival, you have insulted a mining guild, solicited a mating challenge in a sacred courtyard, and been tackled by a foreign diplomat on a global broadcast. The Alliance is considering your immediate recall and court-martial." Elias opened his mouth to speak, but Lyra stepped forward. She was not wearing her silver gown anymore. She was dressed in a high-collared tunic of dark charcoal, severe and buttoned to her chin. "There will be no recall," she said. Her voice was calm, but Elias could hear the strain underneath, like a violin string tightened to the breaking point. The council shifted. A Varen elder, sitting to the far right, leaned forward. His privacy field flickered, revealing a muzzle gray with age. "You speak out of turn, daughter of Vane," the elder growled. "You have disgraced the delegation. You succumbed to the season in a public forum. You claimed a human. It is an aberration. It was a tactical necessity." Lyra lied. She didn't blink. The pheromone inhibitors in the ballroom were compromised. "I sensed a spike in aggression directed at the captain. The biological imperative to protect a diplomatic asset overrode social protocol. I enacted the right of the mantle." The room fell silent. Elias looked at her sideways. She had made that term up. She had to have made it up. "The right of the mantle?" the elder asked, skeptical. "That is an archaic battlefield custom. It is used to shield a vulnerable packmate from alpha aggression. Captain Thorne is my charge," Lyra continued, her chin lifting. "I am responsible for his safety. When Count Varric threatened him, and when the assassin fired, I claimed him, not as a mate, but as a ward. The tackle was not an act of desire, it was an act of security." Elias watched the counselors exchange glances. It was a brilliant pivot. She was reframing a humiliating loss of control as a heroic, disciplined act of bodyguarding. She was saving his career and her own dignity, with a technicality. "If this was a security measure," the High Counselor rumbled, "then why did you scream that he belonged to you?" "Because for the duration of the crisis, his life is my property to protect," Lyra said smoothly. "That is the Varen way. Or have we forgotten our own codes?" The Varen elder grunted, settling back into his seat. "It holds water. Barely. We accept this explanation for now," the High Counselor stated. "However, until the assassin is caught, Captain Thorne is a liability. If he steps out of line again, he will be deported to Earth in cryostasis. And you, Lady Vane, will remain under cultural censure." Dismissed, the moment the doors to the private lift closed behind them. Lyra collapsed against the wall. She slid down until she was crouching on the floor, her head between her knees. "That was the most exhausting lie I have ever told," she whispered. "You called me a vulnerable packmate," Elias said, looking down at her. "Better than calling you a dead man," Lyra snapped without looking up. She took a deep breath, and Elias saw a shudder run through her entire frame. Her tail was wrapped tightly around her ankle, acting as a self-soothing anchor. "Are you okay?" Elias asked, extending a hand. "Do not touch me," she warned, flinching away. Her eyes flashed up at him, the amber glow pulsing erratically. "I am barely holding it together. Elias, the stress of the inquiry, it is accelerating the cycle. Being this close to you is like standing next to a fusion reactor with no shielding." Elias pulled his hand back. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the arrogance. She was sweating, a fine sheen on her forehead. Her pupils were blown wide. She wasn't just annoyed, she was in physical pain, fighting a war against her own biology to keep them both employed. "Let us get you back to the quarters," Elias said softly. I will walk 3 paces behind. Their assigned quarters were a suite in the diplomatic wing, luxurious but currently feeling like a prison cell. Lyra immediately designated the living area as a demilitarized zone. She retreated to her bedroom, instituted a strict lockout protocol, and emerged an hour later wearing a mask that covered her nose and mouth. We need rules, she announced. Her voice was muffled by the filter. Okay, Elias said. He was sitting on the couch, reviewing the sensor logs from the ballroom on his datapad. Rule 1. No tackling. I am serious, she said, pacing the room. She kept a precise distance of 10 feet from him at all times. Rule 1. No physical contact. Rule 2. You will not wear any cologne, scented soap, or aftershave. You will wash with unscented sonic scrubbers only. Rule 3. If I tell you to leave the room, you leave. No questions asked. Elias watched her. She knocked over a vase with her tail as she turned, caught it with supernatural reflexes, and set it back down with a frustrated hiss. Lyra, Elias said gently, you are vibrating. I am trying to concentrate, she yelled, then winced at her own volume. She sat down on the far chair, rigid as a board. She closed her eyes and began a breathing exercise, counting aloud. 1, 2, 3. Control is the mind. The mind is the master. It was tragic and hilarious in equal measure. This was the terrifying diplomat who could silence a room with a look, now reduced to counting to 10 to stop herself from jumping the human on the couch. Elias stood up and walked to the synthesizer unit in the kitchenette. Stay back, Lyra warned, eyes snapping open. I am making coffee, Elias said calmly. Black, no sugar, no scent. He brewed 2 cups. He placed one on the low table in the center of the room, then retreated to the window. You can drink it, he said. I am 10 feet away. Lyra looked at the coffee, then at him. She lowered the mask, took the cup, and inhaled the steam. She looked exhausted. The bravado she wore like armor in the council chamber had dissolved, leaving something younger and more fragile underneath. Thank you, she murmured. Elias looked out at the station lights. The assassination attempt was staged, you know. Lyra sipped the coffee. How do you know? Ballistics, Elias said. He tapped his datapad. The slug that missed me? It was a jagged-tip projectile. Dirty tech. But the trajectory came from the upper gallery, where only security clearance personnel are allowed. And the residue found on the floor? It was synthetic Varen musk. Someone wanted it to look like a Varen crime of passion, Lyra realized. They wanted to frame my people for killing a human envoy. Exactly, Elias said. Which means whoever did this has access to station security and black market biosynthetics. Lyra stood up, the coffee forgotten. We need to find the source of that musk. We? Elias asked. You are supposed to be meditating. I can meditate when I am dead, Lyra said, a spark of her old fire returning. If there is a conspiracy to frame my lineage, I will burn it down. But we cannot investigate officially. The council is watching our feeds. Then we go unofficial, Elias said. I saw a sector on the map called the Undercroft. It looked like the kind of place where you can buy things that don't exist on the manifest. Lyra grinned, and for a second, the predator was back. But this time, she was on his side. It is officially called Sector 9. But yes, if you want to find filth, you go to the bottom. They slipped out of the diplomatic wing an hour later, wearing maintenance coveralls Elias had bribed a cleaning drone to acquire. The descent into the station's bowels was a journey through the social strata of the galaxy, The polished marble and sunlight of the upper levels gave way to gray steel, then to rusted grating and flickering neon. Sector 9 smelled of recycled air, frying oil, and ozone. It was a chaotic warren of stalls selling unlicensed cybernetics, memory shunts, and vat-grown meat. The crowd here was dense and rough, mercenaries, drifters, and exiles from a dozen worlds. Lyra pulled the hood of her coverall up to hide her ears, but she moved with a confidence that made people step aside. Elias kept his hand near the stun baton concealed in his pocket. "We are looking for a broker named Kale," Lyra whispered. "He deals in biological contraband. If someone bought synthetic Varen musk, he will have the receipt." They found Kale's shop in a blind alleyway sandwiched between a noise bar and a coolant processing plant. The sign above the door simply said, "Organics." The interior was dim, lit by tanks of bubbling green fluid containing unrecognizable organs. Kale was a Signian, a bird-like humanoid with feathers the color of oil slicks and 4 articulate hands. He was working on a prosthetic eye with a laser scalpel. "We are closed," Kale croaked without looking up. "We are buying information," Lyra said, stepping into the light. Kyle looked up. His beady black eyes widened when he saw the lower half of Lyra's face. He put the scalpel down. "The Fox of the Summit," he rasped. "You are far from your tower. Highness." "I am not Highness," Lyra corrected sharply. Kale clicked his beak. "Rumors travel down. Little Fox. They say you claimed a human pet. Is this him?" He gestured to Elias with a greasy feathered hand. "I am not a pet," Elias said. "We need to know who is buying jagged tip rounds and synthetic pheromones. Specifically, the batch used at the gala last night." Kale laughed, a dry, scratching sound. "Dangerous questions, expensive questions." Elias slapped a credit chit on the counter. 5,000 credits. Kale swiped the chit with one hand while picking up a data pad with another. "You military types. So direct. The pheromones were custom brewed. A rush order. High-grade mimicry agents. Very illegal." "Who bought them?" Lyra demanded, leaning over the counter. Kale hesitated. Then he turned the screen around. It was a shell company, Apex Solutions. But the payment trail leads back to a secure account, an account linked to the Varen isolationist faction. Lyra froze. "That is impossible. The isolationists want to leave the Alliance, not start a war with it. Unless they are being pushed," Elias said, "or impersonated." Kale tapped the counter. "There is more. The buyer also purchased a memory editor, military grade, the kind used to implant false directives into sleepers." Elias felt a chill. If they have a sleeper agent inside the summit security. Suddenly, Lyra stiffened. Her nose twitched. "We have to go," she whispered. "Why?" Elias asked. "Because we are being hunted," she said. Before Elias could ask how she knew, the front window of the shop exploded inward. 2 figures in heavy combat armor crashed through the glass. They weren't station security and they were unmarked. Elias reacted on instinct, flipping a heavy table over to create a barricade as plasma bolts chewed into the metal counter. "Out the back!" Kale screeched, diving behind his vat tanks. Elias grabbed Lyra's arm and dragged her toward the rear exit. They burst out into a narrow maintenance corridor, sprinting over wet grating as shots pinged off the walls around them. "Left!" Lyra shouted, skidding around a corner. They ran until their lungs burned, navigating the maze of the underlevels. Lyra led them into a disused ventilation shaft, and they crawled through the darkness for 10 minutes before emerging onto a catwalk high above a water reclamation plant. They collapsed against the railing, gasping for air. The roar of the water turbines below masked their breathing. Lyra pulled her hood down, Her hair was messy, her eyes glowing in the gloom. She looked exhilaratingly wild. "You are good in a fight," Elias panted. "For a diplomat." "I had good tutors," she said, wiping soot from her cheek. She looked away, down into the churning black water. Elias sensed a shift in her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a heavy silence. "The isolationist faction," she said quietly. "The account Kale showed us. It belongs to my father's rivals." "Your father is a politician?" "My father was the king," Lyra said. Elias stared at her. "Was? He abdicated 20 years ago when the Republic was formed," she said. "Or so the history books say. In reality, he was forced out by a coalition that wanted to modernize. They kept the royal line alive as figureheads, but stripped us of power. I am not just a liaison, Elias. I am the last heir to a throne that technically does not exist." "That explains the highness comment," Elias said. "It explains everything," Lyra said bitterly. "Why I am a target. If the isolationists can frame me for a diplomatic disaster, they can prove that the royal bloodline is unstable, dangerous. It gives them the excuse to purge my family completely and take total control." She turned to him, her expression vulnerable. "That is why I tried to push you away. I am radioactive, Elias. I am not just a woman in mating season. I am a walking political crisis. You should have let them recall you." Elias looked at her. He saw the loneliness she hid behind the sharp wit and the expensive gowns. She had spent her life being a symbol, a pawn, a problem to be solved. "I don't leave people behind," Elias said. "It is a bad habit from the war." "You are stubborn," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "I am human," he countered. "We are famous for it." He stepped closer. The distance between them had shrunk. In the dark, humid air of the plant, the tension shifted. It wasn't the artificial aggression of the pheromones anymore. It was something quieter, magnetic. Lyra looked up at him. Her eyes searched his face. She took a half step forward, then stopped herself. Her hand hovered near his chest. "I want to." She started, then shook her head. "No. It is the season. It is not real." "Is it?" Elias asked. He didn't move. He let her decide. Lyra closed her eyes. "I do not know where the biology ends and I begin right now. That is the terror of it. I do not want to use you. Elias, you deserve to be chosen, not just caught." "Then choose," Elias said intensely. "When this is over, when the chemicals clear, you choose." Lyra opened her eyes. The amber light was soft, warm. "I will hold you to that, pilot." A beep on Elias's data pad broke the moment. He checked it. "I pulled the data from Kale's terminal before we ran." He said, "The shell company, Apex Solutions? They have a registered storage facility in the holographic garden district." "Then that is where we go," Lyra said, stepping back and pulling her professional mask back into place. "But we must be careful. If they have memory editing tech, anyone we meet could be a trap." The holographic garden district was a marvel of illusion. It was a massive sector where hard light projectors created perfectly realistic environments for weary space travelers. Tonight, it was simulating a terraced garden from the prismic moons, floating islands of crystal flora suspended in a purple twilight. It was beautiful and empty. The district was closed for maintenance, which meant Elias and Lyra had to break in. They moved through the shimmering digital foliage. The air hummed with the energy of the projectors. There, Lyra pointed, in the center of a clearing, concealed behind a wall of glitching digital hydrangeas, was a portable containment unit. It looked like a standard cargo pod, but it was heavily shielded. Elias approached it, checking for tripwires. clear. He cracked the seal on the door. Inside, the pod was refrigerated. It contained rows of silver canisters labeled with chemical warnings. Synthetic pheromone concentrate, Class A, Elias read. There is enough here to drive every Varen on the station into a frenzy. And this, Lyra said, holding up a data drive she found taped to the wall. This contains the distribution schematics. They are planning to release this into the ventilation system during the main plenary session tomorrow. It would be a massacre, Elias said. The guards would open fire on the delegates, the peace treaty would be dead, and the Varens would be blamed for starting a riot. We have the evidence, Lyra said. We need to get this to the council. As she turned, the purple twilight flickered. The digital garden dissolved for a second, revealing the gray steel walls of the station, then snapped back into a simulation of a desert, then a jungle. The system is glitching, Elias said, drawing his weapon. It is not a glitch. A voice boomed from everywhere and nowhere. The scenery stabilized into a barren, rocky canyon. Standing on a ridge above them were the two armored figures from the shop, flanked by a dozen combat drones. And behind them stood Count Varric. Varric smiled. You are persistent, little fox. You are a traitor. Varric, Lyra shouted. You would destroy your own people for power? I am saving our people from dilution, Varric roared. We are predators. Lyra, not pets to be leashed by treaties and trade pacts. We belong in the dark, ruling the stars, not begging for scraps at a table with humans and sludge men. He gestured to the drones. Kill the human. Take the female. She will serve as the face of the new order. Once we adjust her memories. The drones activated, their targeting lasers painting Elias's chest with red dots. Run! Elias yelled. He grabbed a canister of the synthetic pheromones from the pod and hurled it at the drones. He fired a single shot into the canister mid-air. It exploded in a cloud of pink mist. The drones didn't care about pheromones, but Varric and his guards did. The concentrated dose hit them like a physical wall. Varric roared, clutching his head, his instincts overloading instantly. The guards staggered, firing wildly into the air. Elias and Lyra sprinted into the holographic jungle. The environment was shifting rapidly now. Snow, fire, rain, as the system was hacked by the attackers. They can track us by heat, Elias shouted as they ducked behind a hard-light boulder. No, Lyra said, her nose twitching. They are blinded by the scent cloud, but the drones are still tracking us visually. She grabbed his hand. Close your eyes. What? Trust me. Elias closed his eyes. Lyra pulled him. She didn't use her eyes. She navigated by the hum of the projectors and the airflow. She led him through a maze of shifting illusions, dodging trees that weren't there and jumping over chasms that were only light. They burst out of the district's rear maintenance hatch just as the simulation behind them dissolved into static. They didn't stop running until they reached the lift to the diplomatic spire. Elias jammed the override key, and the doors slid shut. We have the drive, Elias panted, holding up the data. We have the proof. But we cannot just walk into the council, Lyra said, pressing her forehead against the cool metal of the wall. Varric has allies in security. They will arrest us before we can present the evidence. They will separate us. And if they separate us, they will kill me and memory wipe you. Elias finished. We need immunity, Lyra said desperately. Absolute legal immunity that prevents them from separating us until the summit begins. There is no such thing, Elias said. There is one thing, Lyra said. She looked at him. Her face was pale, her expression terrified but determined. The right of the mantle, it is a temporary claim. But if we formalize it, if we register a bond, a marriage, Elias asked. A bond of state, she corrected. It is an ancient treaty clause. If a Varen royal bonds with a foreign dignitary, they become a sovereign political entity. They cannot be detained or separated without a declaration of war. Elias stared at her. You want to fake marry me to stop a coup? It is the only way to keep you alive until tomorrow morning, Lyra said. She reached out and took his hand. Her claws were retracted. Her skin was warm. Please, Elias, trust me. Elias looked at the woman who had turned his life upside down in 3 days. He looked at the fierce intelligence in her eyes. He squeezed her hand. Do I have to wear a ribbon? He asked. Lyra let out a shaky laugh. No ribbon, just a signature. And perhaps a kiss for the cameras to make it convincing. The lift chimed as it reached the top floor. Let us go shock the galaxy again, Elias said. They walked out of the lift, hand in hand, heading straight for the registrar's office, ready to sign the papers that would bind them together in the eyes of the law, while the real bond between them, messy, dangerous, and undefined, began to take root in the shadow of a looming war. The morning after the makeshift wedding, Elias Thorne discovered that being the claimed human of a Varen royal came with unexpected luggage. The luggage arrived in the form of a heavily armored courier drone hovering outside their suite door at 6 in the morning, delivering a crate of raw, bloody kavar meat and a pamphlet titled So You Have Been Chosen, a survival guide for fragile spouses. Elias sat on the edge of the bed, reading the pamphlet while Lyra paced the living area, already on a call with her press secretary. Listen to this, Elias said, holding up the holographic booklet. Rule number 4. If your mate begins to growl during a diplomatic toast, do not startle her. Simply offer a high-protein snack and slowly back away while exposing your neck as a sign of submission. Lyra muted the call and glared at him. Her tail was swishing with irritation. That was sent by the Traditionalist Council, she said. They are mocking us. They think you are a pet. I think it is kind of thoughtful, Elias said, flipping the page. Apparently, I am also supposed to keep you away from shiny objects and loud noises. It is not funny. Elias, Lyra snapped. It is a little funny, he countered. It wasn't just the Varen elders. The human delegation was in a state of absolute meltdown. Elias's comm unit was flooded with messages from the Terran ambassador, ranging from threats of court-martial to frantic questions about whether the marriage constituted a transfer of citizenship, and if Elias was now legally required to pay Varen luxury taxes. When they finally emerged from the suite to head to the council chambers, the hallway was lined with rival delegates. A Centaurian diplomat sneered as they passed. Here comes the trophy husband, the Centaurian muttered to his aide. I wonder if she makes him sleep at the foot of the bed. Elias felt his jaw tighten, but before he could respond, Lyra stopped. She turned slowly, her heels clicking on the metal deck. She didn't growl. She didn't flash her claws. She simply adjusted the collar of her tunic and looked the diplomat up and down with terrifying, icy calm. Ambassador, she said, her voice smooth as glass. If you are quite finished discussing my domestic arrangements, perhaps you should focus on your own sector. I hear your trade negotiations are collapsing faster than your spinal integrity. The Centaurian sputtered. Lyra took Elias's arm and guided him into the lift. Don't let them bait you, she whispered as the doors closed. That is what they want. They want the wild animal. I will give them the queen. For the rest of the day, Elias watched her work. It was a masterclass in political theater. Lyra stood before the press corps, the cameras flashing like strobe lights, and dismantled the scandalous narrative brick by brick. She didn't apologize for the bond. She weaponized it. She spoke of interspecies solidarity, of the protective mantle as a symbol of the alliance's commitment to mutual defense. She was brilliant. She was commanding. But later, when they retreated to a secure holding room during a recess, the mask fell. Lyra slumped into a chair, rubbing her temples. "I hate this," she murmured. "You are winning," Elias said, handing her a bottle of water. "The polls are swinging. The public loves the romance angle." "I do not want them to love the romance," she said, her voice bitter. "I want them to listen to my policy on trade routes. I want them to respect my intellect, not fascinate over my biology. Look at the headlines. Elias, the fox and her pilot. Love in the time of pheromones. I am not a diplomat to them anymore. I am just a creature in season who found a shiny toy." Elias looked at her. He saw the fatigue etched around her eyes. He realized then that her arrogance wasn't vanity. It was a fortress she had built to keep the galaxy from reducing her to a stereotype. "You are not a creature," Elias said firmly, "and I am not a toy. You are the smartest person in that room. Lyra, you are running circles around veteran ambassadors while fighting your own body chemistry. That is not instinct. That is grit." Lyra looked up at him, surprised. "I saw how you handled the Centaurian," Elias continued. "You didn't attack him. You dismantled him with data. That is leadership." Lyra held his gaze for a long moment. The amber light in her eyes softened. "Thank you, husband," she said, and this time, the word didn't sound like a joke. A chime from Elias's datapad broke the silence. It wasn't a standard notification. It was a low-frequency pulse, the kind used by military intelligence for dead drops. Elias frowned and opened the file. It was heavily encrypted, but his pilot clearance codes unspooled it. "What is it?" Lyra asked, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "It is a coordinate packet," Elias said, "sent from an anonymous relay. There is a message attached." He read it aloud. "The archive you seek is not on the station. The key to the conspiracy lies where the moon was broken. Go to Ethelgard. Trust no one." Lyra went pale. "Ethelgard? You know it?" "It is a ruin," she whispered. "One of the old jagged moons on the fringe of the Varen sector. It was once a temple of the Bios Keepers, the ancient order that studied our genetics. It was abandoned centuries ago during the Great Fracture. If the conspiracy is manufacturing pheromones and editing memories," Elias reasoned, "a genetic research temple is exactly where they would hide the original data." "We have to go," Lyra said, standing up. "We can't," Elias said. "We are under surveillance. The moment we try to book a shuttle, the Council will ground us." "Then we do not book a shuttle," Lyra said, a dangerous spark returning to her eyes. "We steal one." 2 hours later, they were sprinting across the docking gantry of Hangar Bay 42. The station was sleeping, or as close to sleeping as a 24-hour diplomatic hub ever got. Lyra had arranged for a distraction, a leak to the press that she was having a breakdown in the spa wing, while Elias cashed in a decade of favors to get the access codes to a stealth courier ship. The ship, named the Wraith, was a sleek, matte black needle of a vessel designed for speed and invisibility. Elias vaulted into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls with a familiarity that made his soul sing. "Strap in," he called out. "We are leaving without clearance." Lyra buckled herself into the co-pilot seat. "Can you fly this thing manually? The station traffic control will try to override the autopilot." "Lady," Elias grinned, the engines humming to life beneath them, "I can fly a brick if it has thrusters." He punched the throttle. The Wraith shot out of the hangar bay, narrowly missing a slow-moving cargo hauler. Alarms blared on the console as the station's tractor beams tried to lock onto them, but Elias danced the ship through the traffic lanes, using the magnetic wake of a freighter to mask their signature. Within minutes, they were clear of the station's gravity well and punching into hyperspace. The stars elongated into streaks of white fire, and the silence of the void wrapped around them. The journey to Aethelgard took 3 days. It was a strange, suspended time. The ship was small, forcing them into a proximity that was both domestic and charged. They ate synthetic rations out of foil packets, sitting on the floor of the cockpit because the mess hall was full of cargo crates. They talked, not about the conspiracy or the politics, but about the things that sat heavy in the quiet moments. Elias told her about the Carol incident. He told her about the order to drop the charges, the realization that the target wasn't a military bunker but a civilian protest camp, and how he had jammed his own weapons system to prevent the massacre. They called me a hero publicly because they couldn't admit I disobeyed, Elias said, staring at the swirling hyperspace tunnel. But they hated me for it. They made me a diplomat to bury me. I have spent the last 2 years waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for them to use me as a scapegoat. Lyra listened, her tail curled neatly around her feet. I know the feeling of being used, she said softly. She told him about growing up in the shadow of the throne. She spoke of the pressure to be perfect, to be the symbol of a species that the rest of the galaxy viewed as exotic and dangerous. My biology is a commodity, she said. During the season, I am not a person to my people. I am a vessel for the bloodline. And to the Alliance, I am a ticking time bomb. Everyone wants to own a piece of me. Elias, the politicians, the traditionalists, the media. She looked at him. That is why I fought you at first. I was terrified that you were just another handler, another person trying to steer me. And now? Elias asked. Now, Lyra said, I think you are the only person who sees me. Not the princess, not the fox, just Lyra. The atmosphere in the small ship shifted. The air felt thinner, warmer. It is getting harder, Lyra admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. The season. Being this close to you, it feels like a storm inside my head. A constant roaring noise telling me to claim, to bite, to keep. Elias turned his chair to face her. I am not going anywhere, he said. It is not that, she said. She reached out, her hand hovering near his face. Her claws were slightly extended, trembling. I am afraid that I will lose the choice, that I will wake up and realize I forced you, that I made you mine because my DNA demanded it, not because I wanted it. Elias caught her hand. He didn't flinch at the claws. Lyra, look at me. She met his eyes. I am not a victim here, he said. I am a grown man. I can walk away if I want to. I am staying because I want to stay. But the storm, she whispered. Let it storm, Elias said. You are the captain of that ship. Lyra, I trust you to steer it. Lyra let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. She leaned into his touch, rubbing her cheek against his palm. It was a gesture of profound trust, surrendering her defensive instincts. If I ever cross a line, she vowed, her voice fierce, if I ever make you feel unsafe, you leave, you run. Promise me. I promise, Elias said, but I don't think I will have to. On the 3rd day, they dropped out of hyperspace. Aethelgard hung in the dark like a shattered jewel. The moon had been cracked open by some ancient cataclysm, a massive fissure running through its equator. Debris rings sparkled around it, and the surface was a landscape of jagged peaks and deep, purple canyons. Elias navigated the debris field, his hands steady on the yoke. There, Lyra pointed, That structure on the ridge, it was a ruin, half buried in the lunar dust. Massive stone pillars spiraled up into the vacuum, surrounding a central dome that seemed to be made of organic glass. Elias set the ship down in a crater a mile out to avoid detection. They suited up in environmental gear, though the scanner indicated the moon had a thin, breathable atmosphere maintained by ancient terraforming engines. The trek to the temple was eerie. The gravity was low, making their movements bounding and dreamlike. As they approached the entrance, Elias saw murals carved into the stone. They depicted Veyran figures, tall and regal, standing amidst swirling energy fields. "Look," Lyra said, brushing dust off a carving. "These figures, they are not suppressing the season. They are channeling it." She pointed to a glyph where a Veyran male and female stood back to back, surrounded by halos of light. The text says, "Harmony in chaos." Lyra translated this temple. It wasn't just for genetics, it was a school. The ancients had technology to regulate the mating cycle. They didn't drug it away like we do with modern suppressants. They integrated it. They could choose when to trigger it and when to pause it. "If that is true," Elias said, looking around, "then the suppressants the Alliance sells you, the ones that make you foggy and dull, they are unnecessary," Lyra finished, anger rising in her voice. "We have been medicated for centuries to make us easier to control. The factions, the corporations, they profit from our instability. If we could control ourselves, we wouldn't need them." Elias checked his motion tracker. It pinged. "We are not alone," he said. Shadows detached themselves from the rocks above, 6 figures in stealth armor, carrying military-grade plasma rifles. "Mercenaries," Elias hissed, pulling Lyra behind a pillar. "You are trespassing," a voice amplified by a helmet speaker echoed. "This is a restricted excavation site. Surrender the Veyran female, and the human can leave." Elias looked at Lyra. "They don't want witnesses." "I smell them," Lyra whispered. Her eyes were glowing bright in the dim light, 6 of them. "But there is a vent shaft 10 meters to your left. It leads underground." "On my mark," Elias said. He pulled a flash grenade from his belt. "Mark!" Elias tossed the grenade. It detonated with a blinding burst of white light and a sonic screech that overloaded the mercenaries' helmet sensors. "Go!" They sprinted for the vent. Plasma bolts sizzled past them, melting the rock. Lyra moved with supernatural speed, grabbing Elias's harness and hauling him over the rough terrain. They dove into the shaft just as a grenade exploded at the entrance, sealing them in. They tumbled down a slide of smooth metal, landing in a subterranean chamber. It was dark, illuminated only by the bioluminescence of ancient moss growing on the walls. "Are you hit?" Elias asked, checking her. "I am fine," Lyra said, "but they will cut through the rock. We have to keep moving." They ran through the catacombs. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse. The mercenaries were professional, flanking them, driving them deeper. But they were fighting on Lyra's turf now. In the dark, her senses were a weapon. She could hear their heartbeats. She could smell the ozone charging in their rifles before they fired. "2 on the right," she whispered. Elias didn't question her. He fired blindly around the corner, hearing a yelp of pain. They reached a massive blast door at the end of the corridor. It was sealed. "I can't hack this," Elias said, frantically trying to interface with the panel. "It is biological encryption." Lyra stepped forward. She placed her hand on the sensor pad. The stone glowed. A beam of red light scanned her retina, then her hand. Genetic signature confirmed. A mechanical voice intoned, "Welcome, child of the blood." The heavy doors groaned open. They slipped inside and sealed them shut just as the mercenaries rounded the corner. They were in the inner sanctum, It was a vast circular room lined with data cores. In the center stood a pedestal with a single, glowing interface. "This is it," Lyra said, approaching the pedestal, "the central archive." She laid her hand on the interface. The room lit up. Holographic screens filled the air, cascading with data. Elias scanned the files. "It is all here," he said. "The schematics for the pheromone weapon, the payment ledgers, the plan to trigger a riot at the summit." He scrolled down, and the mastermind. A face appeared on the main screen. It wasn't a Varen warlord. It was a human. "Director Holloway," Elias said, his blood running cold. "The head of Alliance Security. He is working with the Varen isolationists," Lyra noted, pointing to a second face. "Count Varric. It is a coalition. The Alliance wants to keep Vera weak so they can strip mine our outer colonies. The isolationists want power. They agreed to stage the riot to justify a military occupation of the Varen sector. They are going to start a war just to boost stock prices," Elias said, disgusted. "Wait," Lyra said. She was staring at a file that had opened automatically when she touched the console. The screen displayed a DNA double helix, rotating slowly. It was comparing Lyra's scan from the door to a file titled Royal Succession Protocol. Match confirmed, 99.9%. Subject, Lyra Vane. Status, Queen Regnant. Lyra stepped back, her hand covering her mouth. "What is it?" Elias asked. "My father. He didn't just abdicate," she whispered. "He was the last of the biologically enhanced line. The line that could use the ancient tech. They told me the trait had died out. They told me I was just a figurehead." She looked at Elias, her eyes wide with shock. "I am not just a diplomat. Elias, this system, it only responds to the monarch. I am the rightful ruler of the Varen systems." The realization hung in the air. The conspiracy wasn't just trying to frame a diplomat. They were trying to kill the only person who could unlock the technology to free her people from biological slavery. "We have to get this back to the summit," Elias said. "If you show them this, if you show them you can control the season." "Then the entire political board flips," Lyra said. She looked at the screen, then at Elias. She stood straighter, the shock fading into a steely resolve. "They wanted a wild animal," she said. "I am going to show them a queen." A heavy thud shook the door behind them. The mercenaries were cutting through. "Grab the drive," Elias said, readying his weapon. "We have a throne to reclaim." The return to orbital station Zenith was not the triumphant homecoming of a lost queen. It was a silent, terrified insertion into enemy territory. Elias docked the Wraith inside a decommissioned waste processing airlock in Sector 12, bypassing the official traffic controllers who were undoubtedly scanning for their genetic signatures. The station felt different now. The air was heavy with unspoken threats. As they moved through the maintenance shadows, Elias saw the news feeds projected on the massive public screens. The footage was grainy and heavily edited. It showed the ballroom tackle from 3 nights ago. But the audio had been warped. Lyra's desperate cry of protection had been lowered in pitch to sound like a beast's roar. The commentary scrolled beneath in jagged red letters. "Varen diplomat goes feral. Human envoy critically injured. Is the Alliance safe from predators?" "They are turning you into a monster," Elias said, pulling his cap lower to hide his face. Lyra stopped, staring at the screen. Her reflection in the shop window next to them looked tired, dusty, but terrifyingly human. "It is easier to cage a monster than a queen," she said softly. "If they convince the public I have lost my mind to the season, they can lock me away for my own safety. And once I am locked away, I will never be seen again." They took refuge in a safe house Lyra had established years ago for defecting artists, a small, cramped apartment in the mid-levels that smelled of stale paint and anxiety. Elias secured the door while Lyra went immediately to the secure terminal to decrypt the rest of the Ethelgard drive. Elias watched her. The revelation on the moon had shifted the gravity between them. She wasn't just his partner or his charge anymore. She was the focal point of a civil war that threatened to burn across 3 systems. "This is getting big." "Lyra," he said, leaning against the doorframe. The gun in his hand felt heavy. "We are not just fighting a corrupt security chief. We are fighting history. If you claim the throne, half your people will rise up. The other half will try to kill you, and the Alliance will likely back the side that sells them cheap ore." Lyra stopped typing. She didn't turn around. "Are you looking for an exit, pilot?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her ears were swiveled backward, listening for his heartbeat. "I am looking at the odds," Elias said. He holstered the weapon and walked over to her. "I am a soldier. I know when a skirmish turns into a meat grinder. If we do this, if we try to put a crown on your head, there is no going back to the diplomatic corps. There is no going back to Earth." Lyra turned then. Her eyes were burning with that amber intensity, but the frantic edge of the mating season was tempered by a steely resolve. "I do not want a crown," she said fierce. "I do not want to rule, but I will not let them turn my people into livestock. Varric and Halloway want a puppet queen who signs treaties and breeds heirs on command. They want the season to be a shackle." She stood up, closing the distance between them. She was vibrating with energy, the ancient biology of her lineage reacting to the stress, but she held herself with absolute control. "I need to know." "Elias," she said, "not as a queen commanding a subject. Not as a Varen claiming a mate. I need to know as a woman standing in front of a man. Are you here because you have nowhere else to go? Or are you here because you believe in me?" Elias looked at her. He saw the fear behind the bravado. He saw the lonely girl who had been raised in a golden cage, told she was too wild for civilization and too civilized for her own instincts. He reached out and took her face in his hands. "I am not here for the politics," he said. "I am here because you are the only thing in this galaxy that makes sense to me." Lyra let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket and pulled him close, burying her face in his neck. It was a possessive gesture. Deeply Varen, but there was no aggression in it. It was an anchor. "You are mine," she whispered into his skin, "but only if you say it." "I am yours," Elias answered. She pulled back, her eyes searching his. "Then I need you to trust me. We are going to break the narrative. We cannot win a shooting war against the Alliance security forces. We have to win the story." "How?" Elias asked. "We go where they cannot shoot us," Lyra said, a wicked smile curling her lips. "We go to the one place where a feral beast would never hide." The Celestial Springs Spa and Resort was the most exclusive enclave on the station. It was a sanctuary of steam, silk, and exorbitant membership fees, reserved for the ultra-wealthy of a dozen species. It was also, as Lyra pointed out, neutral ground where violence was considered the ultimate social faux pas. They walked in through the front entrance. Elias was wearing a silk robe he had stolen from a laundry cart, and Lyra was draped in a towel that cost more than Elias's annual salary. They looked ridiculous. They looked arrogant. They looked perfect. The concierge, a multi-limbed droid plated in gold, glided forward. "Madam, sir," the droid intoned, "I do not have a reservation on file, and I must insist that the facility is currently at capacity for the pre-summit relaxation period." Lyra dropped the towel slightly, revealing the royal crest tattooed on her shoulder, and the very real, very dangerous set of claws resting on the counter. "My bondmate and I have had a very stressful week," she purred. "The media is so intrusive. We require the Emerald Suite, and if you tell anyone we are here, I will file a complaint that will have you scrubbed down to a toaster oven." The droid processed this for a nanosecond. "The Emerald Suite is available immediately, Highness." Once inside the suite, which featured a private waterfall and a view of the nebula, Elias collapsed onto a chaise lounge. "We are hiding in a spa," he said, staring at the ceiling. "I am a decorated fighter pilot, and my tactical position is a mud bath." "It is the last place Holloway will look," Lyra said, moving to the wet bar. She poured 2 glasses of sparkling nectar. "While you enjoy the humidity, I have a meeting." "Here? In the steam room," she said. "I sent a coded signal to the dissident leaders. They are smuggling themselves in as massage therapists." Elias laughed. "You are amazing." "I know," she said, handing him a glass. "Now, try to look like a pampered trophy husband. Use your soft power. Charm the staff. Find out if any security teams have been sweeping the upper levels." While Lyra disappeared into the steam clouds to negotiate the future of her species, Elias went to work. He wandered down to the communal pool, feigning boredom. He struck up a conversation with a nervous-looking aide to the Terran ambassador. "Rough week?" Elias asked, sipping his drink. The aide looked at him. "You have no idea. The security levels are spiked. Director Holloway has locked down the data vaults in Sector 4. Something about a threat to the summit." "Sector 4, Elias noted mentally. "I heard they are worried about the Varens." Elias pressed gently, offering the aide a refill from his own pitcher. "It is not just the Varens," the aide whispered, lowering his voice. "Holloway is moving assets, large data servers. He is not securing the summit. He is preparing a broadcast. They are saying it is a safety override, but it looks like a system-wide purge." Elias smiled, kept the conversation light, and extracted 3 more pieces of intel before the aide passed out from the heat. When he returned to the suite, Lyra was waiting. She looked energized, her skin glowing from the steam. "The dissidents are skeptical," she reported. "They think I am a symbol of the old monarchy that failed them. They want a revolution, not a restoration." "What did you tell them?" "I told them I do not want to rule," Lyra said. "I told them I want to give them the Ethelgard tech, the right to control their own biology, to choose their mates, their cycles, their lives, and they are listening," she said. "But they need proof. They need to see that the threat is real." "I have the proof," Elias said. He recounted what the aide had told him. "Holloway is moving servers in Sector 4. He is preparing a broadcast." Lyra's eyes narrowed. The false flag. They are not just going to stage a riot. They are going to broadcast a fabricated confession. They are going to use deepfakes to make it look like the Varen delegation ordered an attack on the summit. "If that broadcast goes out," Elias said, "every Varen on the station will be arrested or shot." "We have to stop it," Lyra said. "We have to get into Sector 4. The spa break was over. Sector 4 was a fortress of server banks and cooling towers. It was the digital brain of the station, where the deepfake AI clusters churned out propaganda. Getting in required more than a stolen robe. It required a ghost. They used the ventilation shafts again, but this time, the security was tighter. Laser grids crisscrossed the tunnels. Elias used his pilot's toolkit to splice the wires, sweating as he worked inches from sensors that would trigger a lethal response. They dropped into the main server room. It was a cold, blue-lit cavern filled with the hum of processing power. In the center of the room, a massive holographic projector was rendering a video file. Elias looked at the screen and felt sick. The video showed Lyra, but it wasn't the real Lyra. It was a perfect digital copy, standing on a balcony screaming for Veyron blood. "Tear them apart!" the digital Lyra shrieked. "The station is ours. Kill the humans." "It is perfect," Lyra whispered, horrified. "Even I would believe it." Elias moved to the console. "I can scrub it, but it is encrypted. It will take time." "Time you do not have," a voice sneered. They spun around. Emerging from the shadows of the server racks was Director Holloway. He was a small man with eyes like flint, flanked by 4 armored tactical droids. "Captain Thorne," Holloway said, shaking his head, "you really are a nuisance. And you, Lady Vane, you look terrible. The season does not suit you. Turn it off." "Holloway," Elias said, stepping in front of Lyra. "We have the Ethelgard drive. We know about the coup." Holloway laughed. "Who are they going to believe? A disgraced pilot and a feral alien? By the time this broadcast goes out, the Alliance fleet will be bombarding your homeworld to restore order. We are doing the galaxy a favor. Veyrons are unpredictable, dangerous. We are just putting you on a leash." He signaled the droids. "Kill them. Make it look messy, like a mating frenzy gone wrong." The droids raised their weapons. Lyra stepped out from behind Elias. She didn't look at the droids. She looked at the ventilation intake above the server banks. "Elias," she said calmly, "do you trust me?" "With my life," he said. "Drop." She commanded. Elias dropped to the floor. Lyra reached into her pocket. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small glass vial, the sample of the synthetic pheromone mimic they had stolen from the Garden District. She smashed it on the floor. The scent hit the air instantly. It was thick, cloying, and designed to trigger aggression in Veyrons. But Holloway and the droids weren't Veyron. However, the server room was cooled by high-speed fans. Lyra took a deep breath. She didn't fight the scent. She let it hit her. Her eyes dilated until they were black voids. Her claws extended fully. She let out a sound that wasn't human, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated the metal floor plates. It was the call of the Alpha, but she twisted it. She wasn't calling for a mate. She was projecting pure, concentrated predatory terror. The droids were programmed to react to threat levels. Lyra's biosign spiked so high, so fast, that their sensors overloaded. They perceived her not as a target, but as a catastrophic environmental hazard, threat level critical. The droids chimed, recalibrating. In that second of confusion, Lyra moved. She was a blur of violence. She didn't attack Holloway. She attacked the cooling pipes. She slashed through the liquid nitrogen conduits. Freezing white fog exploded into the room, mixing with the pheromones. The sudden temperature drop cracked the optical sensors of the droids. Elias rolled and fired. He took out the 2 droids on the left with precise shots to their power cores. Lyra leaped through the fog, landing on top of the console. She ripped the hard drive containing the deepfake out of the terminal with her bare hands, sparks showering around her. Holloway drew his sidearm, aiming at Lyra. Elias didn't hesitate. He tackled Holloway, a mirror of the moment Lyra had tackled him. They hit the floor, the gun skittering away. Elias punched Holloway, a solid right hook that laid the director out cold. Elias scrambled up. "Lyra!" She was standing on the console, clutching the drive. She was breathing hard, shaking. The pheromones were raging in her system. She looked at Elias, and for a second he saw the animal Holloway feared. Then she blinked. She forced her breathing to slow. She looked at the drive in her hand, then at Elias. "I am me," she whispered, repeating the mantra. "I am me." She jumped down. Her hands were bleeding, but she was in control. "I used it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I used the season. I didn't let it drive me, I drove it." "Identity is not a cage," Elias said, grinning through the fog. "We have the fake," Lyra said, "and we have the real drive from the moon." Holloway groaned on the floor. "Leave him," Elias said. "We have a summit to crash." They escaped the server room just as the backup security teams arrived, slipping out through the compromised ventilation shafts. They emerged on the roof of the diplomatic spire. The wind was howling, and the lights of the station stretched out below them in a dizzying spiral. "The summit starts in 1 hour," Elias said, checking his chrono. "The delegates are taking their seats. If we run, we survive," Lyra said. "We can take the Wraith and disappear. We can live in the Rim. Be free." Elias looked at her. "Is that what you want?" Lyra looked at the station, at the thousands of lives spinning in the void. She looked at the drive in her hand that could free her people. "No," she said. "I am done running. I am done hiding who I am." She turned to Elias. "I want to walk in through the front door," she said. "I want to walk in holding your hand. I want them to see the Queen, and the pilot, and the truth." "It is suicide," Elias said. "It is politics," Lyra corrected. She smoothed her ruined dress, wiped the blood from her cheek, and offered him her arm. "Shall we go start a revolution, husband?" Elias took her arm. He felt the strength in her, the electric connection that bound them together. "Lead the way, wife," he said. They walked toward the lift that would take them down to the Grand Hall, ready to face the galaxy, the gunmen, and the judgment of history, armed with nothing but the truth in each other. The Grand Hall of Orbital Station Zenith was designed to intimidate. It was a vast, cylindrical chamber located at the very hub of the station's centrifugal ring, where the artificial gravity was most stable and the view of the gas giant below was most commanding. Tiers of seating curved upward toward a domed ceiling of diamond glass, holding 2,000 delegates from the 3 major star systems. Tonight, the air inside the hall tasted of ozone and fear. The summit had not yet officially begun, but the battle lines were already drawn in the seating arrangements. The Terran Coalition delegates sat in a rigid block of charcoal gray suits, checking their tactical datapads with nervous efficiency. The representatives of the United Systems, a loose federation of aquatic and crystalline species, shimmered in their hydration tanks and containment fields, their bioluminescence pulsing with agitation. And in the isolated sector designated for the Veyron delegation, the mood was funereal. The Veyrons sat in silence, surrounded by an extra perimeter of Alliance security drones. They looked less like diplomats and more like prisoners waiting for a verdict. The rumors of the mating season hysteria, fueled by the doctored footage of Lyra, had done its work. Every time a Veyron delegate shifted in their seat, 100 heads turned, waiting for the beast to snap. At the podium, the High Counselor, a towering figure draped in the ceremonial robes of the Alliance, raised a gavel made of meteor iron. "Order," the counselor boomed, the voice amplified to rattle the teeth of everyone present. "We are here to ratify the Treaty of the Three Suns. But before we begin, we must address the security concerns regarding the Veyron delegation." The heavy double doors at the back of the hall hissed open. They did not slide open for a servant or a latecomer. They were overridden. Lyra Vane stood in the archway. She was not wearing the silk of a diplomat or the armor of a warrior. She was wearing a gown of deep, midnight blue, cut with a severity that suggested a military uniform. Her silver hair was pulled back into a braided crown, exposing the sharp, elegant lines of her neck and jaw. Her amber eyes swept the room, not with the frantic energy of the season, but with the cold, crushing weight of a collapsing star. Beside her stood Captain Elias Thorne. He was in his dress uniform, but he had stripped the medals from his chest. He wore only his rank insignia and a sidearm holstered openly at his hip. He did not walk behind her. He walked exactly in step with her, his shoulder brushing hers, his gaze daring anyone to challenge their proximity. A murmur rippled through the hall. It wasn't the laughter of the gala. It was the uneasy sound of a crowd realizing they had miscalculated the threat. "Take your seat, Lady Vane," the High Counselor commanded, though his voice wavered slightly. "You are late." "I am not late," Lyra said. Her voice was not shouted, yet it carried to the highest tier without a microphone. "I am precisely on time to correct the record." She began to walk down the central aisle. The security drones hovered, their sensors confused by the lack of aggression in her biosignature, yet overwhelmed by the sheer power of her presence. "The record states that the Veyron people are biologically unstable," Lyra continued, her heels striking the floor with rhythmic precision. "It states that our season makes us unfit for governance, unfit for sovereignty." She stopped in the center of the room, directly beneath the massive holographic display that hovered above the podium. Elias stopped with her. He placed a hand on the small of her back, not to restrain her, but to support her. The gesture was intimate, casual, and shocking in its blatant disregard for the taboos of the weak. "We are here to vote on the treaty," the counselor insisted. "There is no treaty," Elias said, speaking for the first time. His voice was the dry, flat tone of a pilot relaying bad coordinates. "There is only a hostile takeover disguised as a peace deal." Gasps erupted from the Terran sector. "Arrest them!" a voice shouted from the upper balcony. It was Count Varric, standing with the isolationist faction. He pointed a trembling finger at Lyra. "She is in a feral state. She is dangerous." As if on cue, the massive holographic screen above the podium flickered. The official alliance seal vanished, replaced by static. Then, the video began to play. It was the deepfake, the one Elias and Lyra had seen in the server room, but this version was even more visceral. It showed Lyra standing over the body of a human diplomat, her mouth bloody, screaming commands to a pack of Veyron soldiers to slaughter the delegates. "The Alliance is meat," the digital Lyra shrieked, the sound distorted to a demonic pitch. "We claim this station. We claim your blood." Chaos exploded. It was instant and absolute. The Terran delegates scrambled from their seats, shouting for the guards. The aquatic species retreated into their armored tanks. The security drones, receiving the falsified threat level from the video, turned their weapons toward the Veyron sector. "This is the false flag," Elias yelled over the din, drawing his sidearm not to fire, but to shield Lyra. "They are triggering the purge." Lyra did not flinch. She did not look at the screen where her digital doppelganger was roaring. She looked at the control booth suspended high above the hall. "Now! Elias!" she commanded. Elias pulled the Ethelgard data drive from his pocket. He didn't run for a terminal. He jammed it into a portable transmitter he had rigged to his belt, a high-output military signal booster. "Override initiated," he shouted. The screen above them glitched violently. The image of the feral Lyra froze, distorted, and then shattered into pixels. A new image replaced it. It was a stream of code. Raw, scrolling data. Then a video file from the hidden camera in the server room. It showed Director Holloway standing next to the deepfake projector, laughing as he ordered the fabrication of the Veyron riots. "We are doing the galaxy a favor," the recorded Holloway sneered, his voice booming through the grand hall. "Veyrons are unpredictable. We are just putting you on a leash. The hall fell into a stunned silence. The security drones, caught between conflicting protocols, powered down their weapons and hovered in confusion. That is the director of Alliance Security. Lyra's voice cut through the silence like a blade, admitting that the threat you fear was manufactured by your own leaders. She turned to face the Terran delegation. You were told I am a monster so you would not have to look me in the eye when you stole my planet, she said. You were told my biology is a curse so you could justify selling us the cure. The High Counselor looked pale. Cut the feed, he screamed at the booth. Cut it now! But the booth was not responding. The Ethelgard drive had locked the system. Suddenly, the floor beneath them lurched. A siren began to wail, a low, mechanical groan that signified a catastrophic structural failure. They are blowing the magnetic locks, Elias realized, checking his wrist comp. They are trying to detach the Grand Hall from the station to silence the witnesses. The ring is rotating, Lyra shouted. Get to the exits! The artificial gravity in the hall flickered. The centrifugal force that kept them grounded began to fluctuate as the ring spun out of alignment. Delegates screamed as they were lifted off their feet, floating weightlessly for a second before slamming back down as the gravity stabilizers tried to compensate. We have to get to the control spire, Elias yelled, grabbing Lyra's hand. We have to restabilize the ring before it shears off into space. They sprinted toward the side exits, dodging panicked diplomats and confused drones. The corridor outside the hall was a nightmare of shifting physics. The floor became the wall, then the ceiling, as the ring spun independently of the central hub. Up is down, Lyra warned, leaping over a floating catering cart. She used her claws to anchor herself to a bulkhead as the gravity reversed. Elias, lacking claws, grabbed her belt. She hauled him up, her strength amplified by the adrenaline of the season. They are venting the atmosphere in the corridor, Elias shouted, pointing to the warning lights flashing red. We have 3 minutes before this sector is vacuum. They pushed off the bulkhead, flying through the zero-gravity center of the corridor. It was a dizzying, 3-dimensional obstacle course. They dodged floating debris, statues, potted plants, abandoned luggage, while plasma bolts sizzled past them. Mercenaries in pressure suits had breached the airlock at the far end. They were firing indiscriminately. Elias spun in midair, firing 2 controlled shots. One mercenary's suit ruptured, sending him spinning away. Use the momentum, Elias shouted to Lyra. She understood instantly. She kicked off the wall, turning herself into a kinetic projectile. She slammed into the second mercenary, not with a weapon, but with the sheer mass of her body moving at speed. They crashed into the far wall, the impact knocking the mercenary unconscious. They reached the door to the control spire. Elias hacked the panel, his fingers flying over the keys as the air grew thin and cold. The door hissed open. They tumbled inside, gasping as the emergency life support flooded the room with oxygen. The control room was circular, lined with viewports that showed the terrifying spin of the station against the stars. Standing at the main console, frantically typing commands, was not Holloway. It was Ambassador Krell, the senior Terran diplomat who had been leading the peace talks. Krell turned, his face a mask of sweat and panic. You were supposed to be dead in the server room, Krell shouted, pulling a small holdout blaster from his jacket. You broke the gravity seals, Elias said, stepping forward, his hands raised but his muscles coiled. You are going to kill 2,000 people, Krell, including your own delegation. Acceptable losses, Krell spat, to save the Alliance from chaos, to stop a feral queen from taking the throne. It is a price we wrote into the budget. He is not the mastermind, Lyra said quietly. She walked toward him, ignoring the gun. He is just the accountant. Stay back, Krell warned, his hand shaking. You feared the season, Lyra said, her voice dropping to a hypnotic, predatory timbre. You feared that we were animals, that we could not control our urges. She took another step. And yet, here you are, ready to murder thousands because you are afraid of losing profit. Who is the animal? Ambassador. Who is the slave to their baser instincts? Krell fired. The shot went wide, burning a hole in the console. He was terrified. The pheromones radiating from Lyra were hitting him, triggering a primal fear response he couldn't understand. Lyra didn't attack. She didn't tackle him. She simply stopped 2 feet away and looked at him with absolute, crushing pity. I am not the monster you need me to be, she whispered. Krell broke. He dropped the gun, sobbing, and collapsed against the console. Elias moved in, securing the weapon and shoving Krell aside. He began to input the stabilization codes. I need 2 minutes to sync the gyros, Elias said. Keep watching the door. Lyra stood guard, her back to him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling. Elias, she said, her voice small in the quiet room. Yeah? When you confronted Krell, you didn't look at me. You didn't check if I was going to kill him. I knew you wouldn't, Elias said, typing furiously. How? She asked. The season. It is screaming at me to tear his throat out. To protect the territory. To protect you. But you didn't, Elias said. He hit the final key. The station groaned, the sickening spin slowing as the magnetic locks re-engaged. He turned to face her. You didn't kill him because you are not a biological machine. Lyra, you are the woman who tied a ribbon to a statue because she missed her home. You are the woman who likes her coffee black and hates being called Highness. He walked over to her. The station shuddered one last time and settled into stillness. Lyra looked up at him. Her eyes were still glowing, but the vertical slits of her pupils were widening, softening. That moment in the ballroom, she whispered. When I tackled you, when I claimed you, you saved my life, Elias said. I branded you. She corrected. I marked you as property. It was instinct. Elias, it was the chemicals driving the car. I have been terrified ever since that you stayed because you felt obligated. Because the claim rewired your brain to think you belonged to me. Elias took her hands. He looked at the claws, at the scars, at the trembling fingers. The tackle was the spark, he admitted. It woke me up. I was sleepwalking through my life. Lyra, disillusioned, numb. Then you hit me like a freight train, and suddenly I was alive again. He squeezed her hands. But the fire, the thing that kept us going through the Undercity, through the moon ruins, through the server room, that wasn't pheromones, that was us. I am not with you because you claimed me. I am with you because I admire you, because you make me laugh, because you are smarter than me and braver than me. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. You didn't steal my free will. Lyra, you gave me a reason to use it. I choose you. Every damn day, I choose you. Lyra let out a shuddering breath, tears spilling from her amber eyes. Then let us finish this, she said. Let us give the choice back to everyone. She moved to the main broadcast console. She inserted the Ethelgard drive. This is not a weapon, she said, her finger hovering over the transmit key. This is the genetic key, the ancient code that allows Vayrans to regulate their own cycles, to turn the season on or off at will. If you release this, Elias said, the Alliance loses its leverage. They can't sell you suppressants anymore. They can't claim you are unstable. And the traditionalists lose their power too, Lyra added. No more arranged breeding. No more forced lineages. It will be chaos for a while. Freedom is always messy, Elias said. Do it. Lyra pressed the key. Upload complete. Broadcasting to all frequencies, across the station, and across the 3 star systems connected to the summit feed. The data unfurled. Every Varen data pad, every medical terminal, every personal comm received the key. It wasn't a mandatory patch. It was a file titled The Gift of Ethelgard Optional Protocol. It was done. The leverage was gone. Elias smiled at her. You just liberated a species, Your Majesty. Lyra smiled back, exhausted but radiant. I think I am ready to go home. Elias, I think... The glass of the viewport behind her shattered. There was no sound of a gunshot, just the high-pitched whine of a magnetic railgun round punching through the reinforced window. Elias saw the glint on the adjacent rooftop a split second before the glass broke. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He moved. He threw himself across the space between them, slamming into Lyra and knocking her to the floor. The impact was heavy. Elias grunted, his body jerking violently as the slug caught him. He collapsed on top of her. Dead weight. Elias! Lyra screamed. She rolled him over. The round had hit him in the back, just below the shoulder blade. His uniform was already dark with blood. He was gasping, his eyes losing focus. Lyra looked at the rooftop across the gap. She saw a figure in black stealth armor packing up a long rifle. It wasn't Krell. It wasn't a mercenary. It was Count Varric, making one last attempt to kill the future. Something broke inside Lyra. The season, which had been ebbing, roared back with the force of a tsunami. But this wasn't the heat of mating. This was the cold, white-hot fury of a predator whose mate has been harmed. She let out a shriek that cracked the remaining glass in the viewport. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing Krell's discarded blaster. She didn't look human anymore. She looked like a deity of vengeance. She vaulted through the broken window, clearing the gap between the spire and the adjacent roof with a jump that defied physics. She landed in front of Varric. He dropped his rifle, stumbling back, terrified by the thing that had just landed before him. You... He stammered. Lyra didn't speak. She struck him. She used the pistol as a club, smashing it into his face. He fell. She was on him instantly, her hand gripping his throat, her claws digging in, drawing blood. The rage was absolute. Every instinct in her body screamed kill, tear, end him. She raised her hand, claws fully extended, ready to rip his throat out. It would be easy. It would be exactly what the galaxy expected of her. He is mine, the voice in her head screamed. You hurt what is mine. Lyra! The voice was weak. It came from the control room behind her. She froze. Her hand hovered inches from Varric's jugular. She turned her head. Elias had dragged himself to the window. He was leaning against the frame, clutching his chest, blood dripping onto the floor. He wasn't looking at Varric. He was looking at her. Don't, he wheezed. Don't let them. Make you the beast. Lyra looked at Elias. She looked at Varric, who was whimpering beneath her. She looked at her own hand, shaking with the need to kill. She closed her eyes. She thought of the coffee in the suite. She thought of the ribbon on the statue. She thought of the choice. I am me. She exhaled, a long, shuddering hiss. She opened her eyes. The black void receded, leaving clear golden amber. She retracted her claws. She leaned down, her face inches from Varric's. You are not worth the stain on my soul, she whispered. She stood up. She kicked the rifle away. Alliance security, she shouted, her voice commanding, royal and utterly controlled. Come collect your garbage. Security drones, finally rebooted and under new protocols, swarmed the roof. They secured Varric. Lyra didn't watch them. She leaped back across the gap to the control room. She fell to her knees beside Elias, pressing her hands over his wound. "You idiot," she sobbed, the tears finally coming. "You promised not to be a hero." "I lied," Elias grimaced, his teeth stained with red. "Besides, you tackled me first. It was only fair." "Stay with me," Lyra commanded, her voice breaking. "That is an order. Pilot, you belong to me. Remember? You are not allowed to die." "I am trying," Elias whispered, his eyes fluttering shut. "I am trying." "Medics!" Lyra roared, the sound echoing through the station, a demand that no one in the galaxy would dare refuse. The screen above the podium in the grand hall below flickered back to life. It showed the control room. It showed the Queen, covered in her lover's blood, holding him with a tenderness that broke the hearts of 3 star systems. The coup was over. The conspirators were exposed. The Varens were free. But as the medical team swarmed into the room and pulled Elias from her arms, Lyra Vane stood alone in the center of the wreckage, realizing that the real battle, the battle to keep the one thing she had chosen for herself, had just begun. The recovery ward of Orbital Station Zenith was quiet, save for the rhythmic humming of the bioregenerative field generators. Elias Thorne lay suspended in a tank of translucent blue gel, watching the numbers on the overhead display count down the percentage of tissue knitting back together in his chest. 98%. 99%. The tank drained with a soft hiss, the gel receding until the glass shield popped open. Elias sat up, gasping as the cool station air hit his wet skin. He rubbed the scar on his shoulder, a jagged line of pink new flesh where the magnetic slug had punched through him 3 weeks ago. "You are awake," a voice said from the shadows. Elias squinted. Sitting in the corner, illuminated only by the light of a datapad, was Lyra Vane. She looked exhausted but immaculate, wearing a structured tunic of white and gold that screamed authority. Her tail was curled neatly around the legs of the chair, but the tip twitched with a nervous energy she couldn't quite suppress. "I thought I told you to sleep," Elias said, swinging his legs over the edge of the tank. "And I thought I told you not to die," Lyra countered, standing up. "It seems we are both bad at following orders." She walked over to him, stopping just outside of touching distance. She looked at the scar on his chest, her amber eyes darkening for a fraction of a second with the memory of the rooftop. "The doctors say you will have full range of motion within 2 days," she said, her voice clinical but tight. "And the doctors say you have been sitting in that chair for 18 hours a day." Elias replied, "How is the revolution going, Your Majesty?" Lyra grimaced at the title. "It is messy, it is loud, and it involves far too much paperwork." She handed him a robe. "Put this on," she said. "The press is waiting outside." "The press? You are famous." "Elias," she said, a dry smile touching her lips. "You are the human shield, the pilot of the Queen, the romantic hero of the century, or, if you read the tabloids from the Centaurian sector, you are the bewitched pet of a dangerous sorceress." Elias groaned, pulling the robe on. "I liked it better when they just thought I was incompetent." He followed her out of the ward and into the main corridor. He wasn't prepared for the noise. The moment the doors opened, a wall of sound hit them. Flashes popped like strobe lights. Dozens of drones hovered behind a security barrier, jostling for position. "Captain Thorne," a reporter shouted, "is it true you have signed a life bond contract?" "Lady Vane," another screamed, "will you demand the resignation of the entire council? Does the human have voting rights in the new Varen parliament?" Lyra stopped. She raised one hand. The gesture was small, but the silence that followed was instant. She had learned to wield her presence like a weapon, balancing the predatory charisma of her species with the cold calculation of a statesman. "Captain Thorne is not a prop," Lyra said, her voice projecting clearly. "He is a decorated officer of the Alliance, and the primary reason this station is not currently spinning into the atmosphere. He is recovering. If you flash another light in his face, I will have your drone licenses revoked for a decade." She took Elias's arm, her grip firm and possessive, and led him through the parting crowd. As they walked, Elias saw the feeds playing on the wall screens. The narrative had shifted wildly. The deep fake of the feral monster was gone, replaced by slow-motion montages of Lyra carrying him in the control room, set to swelling orchestral music. There were satirical cartoons, too, one showing a fox in a crown walking a human on a leash, and another showing a human pilot putting a muzzle on a fox. "They are making us into a myth," Elias muttered. "Better a myth than a tragedy," Lyra whispered back. "Myths are harder to kill." The political reality, however, was far less romantic. The Alliance Council, terrified by the revelation of their own complicity in the pheromone conspiracy, was scrambling to salvage their reputation. They had hastily drafted a document titled The Framework for Veyron Sovereignty, a thick stack of legalese that essentially offered Lyra the throne of her people in exchange for continued trade access to the Veyron mineral belts. The meeting took place in the High Council chamber, now repaired and stabilized. The table was long, polished obsidian, reflecting the faces of the 12 most powerful beings in the sector. Lyra sat at the head of the table. Elias sat to her right. He felt out of place in his dress uniform, still stiff from the healing tank. But Lyra had insisted. "You are part of the image," she had told him. "They need to see that I am not ruled by instinct. They need to see that I chose a partner, not a prey item. We are prepared to recognize your claim to the throne," High Counselor Jarek said, clasping his hands. "Provided, of course, that you agree to maintain the current export quotas, and provided you accept an Alliance advisor to assist with the transition." "An advisor?" Lyra asked, arching an eyebrow. "You mean a handler?" "We mean a liaison," Jarex corrected smoothly. "To ensure stability, the sudden release of the Ethelgard Protocol. It is a radical shift. Your people have been on suppressants for centuries. Giving them control of their biological cycles overnight could lead to anarchy." Lyra leaned forward. "Anarchy is what happens when you drug a population to keep them compliant," she said. "What I am offering is autonomy. And as for your advisor..." She looked at Elias. "I have my advisor. Captain Thorne has proven his loyalty to the truth, which is more than I can say for anyone at this table." Jarek scoffed. "Captain Thorne is a pilot. He knows nothing of governance. He knows that power without consent is tyranny," Lyra said sharply. "And that is the only lesson that matters right now." She slid the datapad across the table. "I will accept the throne, Counselor, but not on your terms. I will accept it as a transitional executive. My first act will be to establish a constitutional committee. We will hold free elections within 2 years. And the Ethelgard technology will be open source. No patents, no corporate control. Every Veyron citizen will have the right to regulate their own biology without paying a subscription fee to an Alliance pharmaceutical company. That will bankrupt 3 major corporations," a trade delegate protested. "Then perhaps they should have invested in something other than slavery," Lyra said, standing up. She signaled to Elias. "We are leaving. We have a ship to catch. I believe it is time I visited my home. The journey to the Veyran homeworld, Vera Prime, was done not in the stealth courier the Wraith, but in a massive Alliance cruiser painted in diplomatic colors. It was a victory lap and a funeral procession for the old order. Elias stood on the observation deck as the planet came into view. It was a world of breathtaking greens and violets, shrouded in thick, swirling clouds. It looked wild, untamed. "Are you ready?" Elias asked. Lyra was standing beside him, staring at the world she hadn't seen since she was a child. She was trembling slightly. "The elders will not welcome me," she admitted. "The traditionalists believe that the season is sacred. They believe that controlling it with technology is an insult to the gods. They will say I am polluting the bloodline." "And what do you say?" Elias asked. "I say the gods gave us brains as well as hormones," she said. The landing was a spectacle. Thousands of Veyrans gathered at the spaceport in the capital city of Oakhaven. The air was thick with the scent of pine and ozone. The crowd was a sea of rust-colored fur, silver tails, and curious eyes. When the ramp lowered, Lyra stepped out. She was not wearing a crown. She was wearing simple field gear, the Ethelgard drive clipped to her belt. Elias walked a step behind her. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him. To them, he was an alien, an anomaly, the human who had survived the tackle. They were met at the bottom of the ramp by the High Priestess, an elderly Veyran with fur that had turned completely white. She leaned on a staff of twisted wood, her eyes milky with age but sharp with judgment. "You return, daughter of Vayne," the priestess rasped. "You bring strange machines and a human pet. Do you seek to mock the ancestors?" "I seek to free the descendants," Lyra said, her voice ringing out across the silence of the plaza. She unclipped the drive. She held it up. "For 500 years. We have been told that we are slaves to the moon," Lyra said. "We have been told that every 10 years, we must lose our minds to ensure our future. We have been told that our biology makes us dangerous, that it makes us less." She walked toward the priestess. "This is not a machine of the Alliance. This is the wisdom of Ethelgard. Our own ancestors built this. They knew that true strength is not surrendering to the storm, but learning to sail it." She pressed a button on the drive. A holographic projection sprang to life, the same double helix they had seen on the moon, the image of the Veyran couple standing back to back, glowing with controlled energy. "This technology allows you to choose," Lyra said. "You can choose when to enter the season. You can choose who to bond with. You can choose to feel the fire of our lineage without burning down your life." The priestess stared at the hologram. She reached out a shaking hand to touch the light. "It is the lost art," she whispered. "The harmony." She looked at Lyra, then at Elias. "And the human?" she asked. "Is he a choice or a mistake?" Lyra turned to Elias. She smiled. And for a moment, the queen vanished, replaced by the woman who had tackled him in a ballroom. "He is the best mistake I ever made," she said. "And the only choice that matters." The crowd erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar, a sound of relief, of curiosity, of hope. That night, in the ancient citadel that overlooked the capital's glowing fungal forests, Elias found Lyra on the balcony. The celebrations were winding down below, fires burning in the city squares as the people debated the new future. Lyra was leaning against the stone railing, looking out at the moons. She had taken off the stiff tunic and was wearing a loose robe of silk. "You did good today," Elias said, handing her a glass of wine. "I feel like a fraud," she sighed, taking the glass. "They are calling me the Liberator, but I am just a woman who didn't want to get arrested." History is mostly people trying not to get arrested and accidentally changing the world, Elias said. He stood beside her. The air on Vera was rich, filled with scents Elias couldn't name. It felt alive in a way the sterile air of the station never did. Lyra turned to him. The amber light in her eyes was soft, reflecting the moons. "The season is fading," she said quietly. "The stress triggered it early, and now the adrenaline is gone. The chemicals are settling." "And?" Elias asked. "And I am still here," she said. "I am looking at you, Elias, and I do not feel the frantic need to bite you. I do not feel the compulsion to drag you into a nest." "That is a relief," Elias joked. "My insurance premiums were getting high." She stepped closer, invading his space, but gently this time. "But I do feel something else," she whispered. "I feel a pull, like gravity. It is not loud. It is not screaming. It is just there." She reached up and touched the scar on his neck, a faint white line from where her claws had grazed him during the tackle. "I was afraid," she admitted. "I was afraid that when the season ended, I would look at you and see a stranger. I was afraid that the love was just a biological trick. And now I know," she said. "The biology was just the introduction." She kissed him. It wasn't the desperate, devouring kiss of the gala. It was slow, deliberate. A kiss of exploration, of two people learning the map of each other's souls without the interference of a chemical storm. Elias wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. He felt the solid warmth of her, the strength in her spine. He realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't defined by his rank, or his past mistakes, or his utility to a government. He was just Elias, and he was home. "We have to talk about boundaries," Lyra murmured against his lips. "Now that I am queen." "Okay," Elias said. "Rule number one?" "Rule number one," she said, smiling against his mouth. "You are never allowed to die again." "I can live with that," he said. But the peace was fragile. The next morning, a courier arrived with a sealed scroll from the Northern Duchy. It was from Duchess Kaelin, the head of the cadet branch of the royal family, and the leader of the faction that had opposed Varric's violence but still clung to the old ways. Lyra read the scroll in the council chamber, her face darkening. "What is it?" Elias asked. "An ultimatum," Lyra said, tossing the scroll onto the table. "Duchess Kaelin offers her support for my transition government. She offers to bring the northern armies to my banner." "That sounds good," Elias said. "There is a condition," Lyra said. "She says that for the monarchy to retain its dignity, I must sever my bond with the alien." Elias went still. "She wants you to renounce me," he said. "She wants me to declare the bond null and void," Lyra said. "She says it is a stain on the royal lineage. She says I can keep you as a consort, hidden away in the shadows, but publicly I must be unattached. I must be available for a political marriage to a Veyran noble." Elias looked at the scroll. It was a pragmatic offer. It would secure her power instantly. It would prevent a civil war. "It makes sense," Elias said slowly. "Politically." Lyra looked at him, her eyes flashing. "Do not dare," she warned. Elias walked over to the window. "Lyra, look at the board. You need the North. If you marry a duke, you unite the planet. I can stay in the background. I don't need the title. I just need you." "You think this is about titles?" Lyra asked, her voice rising. "You think I care what they call you?" She walked over to him, grabbing his shoulder and spinning him around. "This is about the vision, Elias. The entire point of the Ethelgard Protocol is choice. If I start my reign by letting a duchess tell me who I can love, Then I am not a queen. I am just another puppet. She poked him in the chest. And do not try to be the noble martyr. It does not suit you. You are my partner, not my dirty secret. Elias looked at her. He saw the fire in her. He saw the absolute refusal to compromise on her own humanity, or his. He smiled. You are going to tell her to go to hell, aren't you? I am going to tell her to come to the capital, Lyra said. And I am going to introduce her to my husband. The confrontation with Duchess Kaelin happened 3 days later in the Great Hall of the Citadel. The Duchess was a formidable woman, tall and severe, surrounded by a retinue of armored guards. She stood before the throne, which Lyra had pointedly refused to sit in, choosing instead to stand on the dais steps. You received my terms, Kaelin said, eyeing Elias with cold disdain. I did, Lyra said, and I found them lacking. The Duchess stiffened. You risk civil war for a human? For a pet? He is not a pet, Lyra said calmly. He is the mirror of our future. She stepped down from the dais, taking Elias's hand. You say he is an alien. I say he is proof that we can coexist. You say he weakens the bloodline. I say he strengthens our spirit. Lyra looked around the hall, addressing not just the Duchess, but the hundreds of nobles watching. We are Varens. We are fierce. We are loyal. But for too long, we have defined loyalty as sameness. We thought we could only trust our own kind. That fear nearly destroyed us. It let men like Varric sell us to the Alliance. She squeezed Elias's hand. This man bled for us. He fought for a world that was not his. He respected my choice when he could have exploited my instinct. That is not weakness. That is the highest form of honor. She looked Kaelin in the eye. I will not renounce him. If you want the Ethelgard technology, if you want a seat at the table of the new government, you accept us. Both of us, as equals, as partners. The silence stretched, tense and brittle. Kaelin looked at Lyra, then at Elias. She saw the way they stood, not one behind the other, but shoulder to shoulder, a united front. Slowly, the Duchess bowed her head. You have your father's stubbornness, she muttered, and perhaps his vision. She knelt. The North stands with you, Majesty, and with the consort. The crisis passed not with a bang, but with a bow. 6 months later, the rebuilt alliance signed the Treaty of Oakhaven. It was a messy document, full of compromises and clauses, but it recognized Varen independence and established a trade federation based on mutual consent. Elias stood on the balcony of their private residence on Vera Prime. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in streaks of violent violet and soft gold. He heard the door open behind him. Lyra stepped out. She had shed the heavy robes of state for the day. She was wearing a simple tunic, her hair loose. Rough day in Parliament? Elias asked. They spent 3 hours debating the tax code on imported fabric. Lyra groaned, leaning against him. I almost ordered the guards to shoot me just to end the boredom. Elias laughed, wrapping an arm around her. Welcome to democracy. It is mostly arguing about money. Lyra rested her head on his shoulder. I miss the running sometimes, she admitted quietly. The adrenaline, the simplicity of just trying to survive. Elias looked out at the horizon. We survived. That was the hard part. Now we have to live. That is the long part. Lyra turned to face him. A mischievous glint sparked in her amber eyes. A spark that reminded him of a ballroom, a red ribbon, and a tackle. It does not have to be boring, she said. Oh no, Elias said, backing away slightly. I know that look. That is the I have a bad idea look. It is a great idea, she said, stalking toward him, her tail swished playfully. Lyra, we are dignified political figures now, Elias warned, though he was grinning. We cannot just... She didn't let him finish. She launched herself at him. It was a perfect reenactment. She hit him low, wrapping her arms around his waist. But this time, Elias didn't fall back in shock. He caught her. He braced himself, laughing, absorbing the impact, and they tumbled together onto the cushioned lounger on the balcony. Lyra ended up on top of him, just like before. Her hair fell around them like a curtain. She pinned his wrists, her face inches from his. "You belong to me," she growled, mimicking her own feral scream from the gala, but her eyes were dancing with laughter. Elias laughed, shaking his head. "You are terrible. The press would have a field day." "Let them look," Lyra said. She softened then, the laughter fading into a warm, steady glow. She let go of his wrists. She laced her fingers through his. "I said it wrong that night," she whispered. "I said you belong to me, like you were a thing, a possession." She leaned down and kissed his forehead, then his nose, then his lips. "I know what I meant now." "What did you mean?" Elias asked softly. "I meant that I belong to you," she said, "and you belong to me. Not because of a ribbon, not because of a season, but because there is nowhere else in the universe we would rather be." "We belong to each other," Elias corrected gently. Lyra smiled. "Yes," she said, "by choice." She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Below them, the city lights flickered on, 1,000 tiny stars waking up in the twilight. The galaxy was still dangerous. The politics were still messy. The future was unwritten. But as Elias ran his hand through her silver hair, and Lyra closed her eyes in the safety of his arms, they both knew one thing for certain. They were ready for whatever came next.